Thessaly was forced to marry a 48-year-old billionaire who bought her at an auction for $50 million. She expected disappointment, especially in bed. "He's old," she thought. "This will be over quickly." But when Cadogan finally took her to his bedroom, he shattered every assumption she'd ever made. 3 times, before he even allowed himself to finish. The man had been stalking her for 6 months, forced her into marriage, had secrets that could destroy them both, and that's just the beginning of their twisted story. Welcome back to Proudly Black Stories, my beautiful, amazing Pride family. You all have been so supportive, and I promise to always try my best to give you the best stories as I learn and improve every day. If this is your first time coming across my video, do comment below where you're watching from and hit subscribe to officially join the Pride family. Now, let's get into today's story. The auction room existed in that peculiar space between legality and something far darker. A converted warehouse south of Pike Place Market, where Seattle's polished veneer gave way to concrete and rust. Thessaly Morgrave stood on a raised platform beneath surgical lighting that turned her skin corpse-pale, her hands bound not with rope but with a leather cuff connected to a short chain anchored to the floor. Decorative, the handlers had called it. Necessary for presentation. She'd stopped screaming an hour ago when she realized no sound would reach beyond the soundproofed walls. And her stepfather's attorney had made it abundantly clear that every signature she'd carelessly scrawled on his insurance documents over the past year had built her cage 1 bar at a time. Around her, the room remained mostly empty. Just 2 men in expensive suits monitoring encrypted tablets, their faces lit by the cold glow of screens. The real bidders existed elsewhere, remote presences, represented only by numbers that climbed with shocking speed across the main display. Her contract marriage rights, packaged neatly alongside NDAs and breeding clauses that made her stomach turn, had started at $5 million. The venture capital firms her stepfather owed wouldn't negotiate, wouldn't extend. They wanted blood or money, and Daxon had chosen to liquidate his only remaining asset. She watched the numbers climb. 15 million, 22 million, 30. Somewhere, men she'd never met were deciding her worth with the clinical detachment of a livestock auction, her bachelor's degree in environmental science unfinished, her mother's medical bills in Vancouver still mounting, her own foolish trust in the man her mother married, all of it reduced to a bidding war between invisible buyers who saw her as solution, possession, revenge, or entertainment. 40 million, one of the handlers announced, his voice professionally neutral. 45. Thessaly closed her eyes. She'd tried everything in the 72 hours since Daxon's attorney explained her situation. Called the police, who informed her the contracts were technically legal in the jurisdictional grey space where they'd been filed. Contacted lawyers she couldn't afford, who went silent after reviewing the paperwork. Even attempted to run, only to discover her stepfather had reported her cards stolen and frozen her accounts. 50 million. The handler's voice changed slightly. Surprise, or perhaps respect for the figure. The bidding stopped. 60 seconds of silence confirmed it. Somewhere in the warehouse's back office, cryptocurrency transferred in untraceable blocks. Digital signatures finalized what her own shaking hand had inadvertently authorized months ago. Sold. Buyer 47. Transportation is waiting. Everything moved with disturbing efficiency after that. The cuff removed. A designer dress provided for her to change into, midnight blue. Her exact size, which should have been impossible. Within 30 minutes she was walking toward a helicopter on a private pad south of the city, flanked by security who gripped her arms with professional courtesy that somehow made it worse. They weren't manhandling her, they were simply ensuring compliance, as if this were all perfectly routine. The flight across Puget Sound took 20 minutes. Thessaly pressed her forehead against the window and watched Seattle's lights give way to darker water, then the affluent shoreline estates of Tacoma's waterfront. The helicopter descended toward a compound that sprawled across what looked like 10 acres, brutalist architecture softened by extensive gardens. The main house, all glass and steel, cantilevered over the Sound. She was deposited in a sitting room that cost more than her entire education. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the water, minimalist furniture in greys and blacks, a single piece of art on the wall. Some abstract that probably had a 7-figure price tag. She stood there, still wearing the dress someone had selected for her, and waited. Cadogan Renvale entered without announcement. She recognized him immediately from the business journals, green energy titan, reclusive billionaire, the man who'd revolutionized solar infrastructure and owned half the renewable projects on the West Coast. Photographs didn't capture his physical presence, the way he seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. 48, but maintained with the resources unlimited wealth provided. Tall, austere, with silver threading through dark hair and eyes, the color of winter storms, he wore a black suit like armor. Miss Morgrave. His voice matched everything else about him, controlled, cold, perfect. The marriage documents are on the table. No. The word came out steadier than she felt. I'm not signing anything else. Your stepfather held power of attorney. The contract is already legally binding. He moved to the bar, poured 2 glasses of something amber. The signature is a formality for the ceremony. Then I refuse the formality. He turned, studying her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. Your refusal is noted. We'll proceed regardless. My attorney is already here. The ceremony happened in a library that smelled of leather and old wood. The attorney, an older man who avoided Thessaly's eyes, performed a perfunctory civil service. She stood silent through vows she didn't speak, watching this stranger who'd purchased her become her legal husband under Washington state law. When Cadogan took her hand to place the ring, his fingers trembled. It was barely perceptible, a hairline fracture in his marble composure. But Thessaly felt it, that minute tremor, as he slid the platinum band onto her finger. She looked up sharply and caught something in his expression before it disappeared. Not quite vulnerability, but something human beneath the ice, some emotion he couldn't fully suppress. Against every rational instinct, she felt her rage flicker with something dangerously close to curiosity. He didn't release her hand immediately. Instead, he leaned closer, his breath warm against her ear as he whispered words meant only for her. I've been watching you for 6 months. The romantic intention was there, the intimacy, the confession of obsession. But it landed like a threat, like the reveal of something profoundly wrong. What billionaire stalked a broke college student for half a year? What darkness had she really just been sold into? Across the room, the attorney shifted uncomfortably, his discomfort obvious. He knew. Whatever this was, whatever Cadogan Renvale really wanted, the attorney knew, and it made him deeply uneasy. Let me pause here and ask you, is Cadogan a villain or a savior right now? Can he be both? If you were Thessaly, would you try to escape immediately or wait to understand the situation first? Let me know your answer in the comments. Thessaly woke to unfamiliar softness, sheets with a thread count she could feel against her skin, a mattress that seemed to cradle rather than support. For 3 perfect seconds, she forgot. Then memory crashed back with the weight of the platinum band on her finger, and she sat up so quickly her vision spotted black. The master suite stretched around her like a magazine spread, floor-to-ceiling windows framing Puget Sound in the grey morning light, minimalist furniture in warm woods and cream fabrics, and a sitting area arranged around a fireplace that probably cost more than her mother's annual medical bills. She was still wearing the midnight blue dress from last night, though someone had removed her shoes and draped a cashmere throw over her. She didn't remember falling asleep. Didn't remember being brought to this room. Then she noticed the details, and her skin went cold. The bookshelf beside the bed held first editions of her favorite novels. The Secret History, Possession, obscure poetry collections she'd written about in a college blog she'd abandoned 2 years ago. The art on the walls depicted pre-Raphaelite paintings, her specific obsession during her brief art history phase. On the nightstand sat a tin of the expensive loose-leaf Earl Grey. She'd only ever bought once as a treat, the same brand, the same blend. Thessaly stood on shaking legs and crossed to the walk-in closet. It opened automatically at her approach, lights activating to reveal rows of clothing, all in her size, all in styles she actually wore. Jeans in the exact cut she preferred. Sweaters in her colors. Even the underwear drawer held the specific brand she bought from Target because it was the only one that fit properly. 6 months, he'd said. He'd been watching her for 6 months. This wasn't surveillance. This was archaeological excavation of her entire existence. She was standing there, holding a sweater in forest green that she'd looked at online but never purchased, when Cadogan appeared in the bedroom doorway. He wore a different suit today, charcoal grey, perfectly tailored, and looked like he'd already been awake for hours. He held a tablet and a cup of coffee, the picture of corporate efficiency. "There's breakfast downstairs when you're ready," he said, as if this were a normal morning in a normal marriage. "I have a board meeting at 10, but we should discuss the household arrangements first." Thessaly walked out of the closet holding the green sweater like evidence at a trial. "You bought my entire personality and put it in a room. I ensured you'd be comfortable." He set the tablet down on a side table with careful precision. "Everything is in your size and selected based on your documented preferences. You'll find toiletries in the bathroom, also customized, documented." She laughed, and it came out slightly hysterical. "You mean stalked? You compiled a file on me like I'm some kind of acquisition project?" "Yes." He didn't even have the grace to look uncomfortable with the admission. "I needed to understand who you were before I intervened." Intervened. Thessaly threw the sweater onto the bed. "You bought me at an auction. You forced me into a marriage. You had my things memorized, like you're some obsessed ex-boyfriend, except we'd never even met. And now, you're keeping me here like what? A pet? A possession? Like my wife." Cadogan moved to the windows, hands in his pockets, his reflection ghost-like against the water view. "There are rules we need to establish. You have freedom within parameters. You can go anywhere in Washington state with security accompaniment. You'll have unlimited access to accounts I've established in your name. You can purchase whatever you want, pursue your education, engage in any activities you choose." "But," she asked, knowing that nothing goes for nothing, "but you cannot leave the state without my permission, and you cannot contact your family directly." The words hit like a physical blow. "My mother, she is safe." He turned to face her. "I've relocated your mother and stepfather to Vancouver, BC. She's in a private medical facility, receiving the treatment she needs. The bills are handled. Daxon's debts are settled. They're both under protection." "Protection from what?" "From the consequences of what your stepfather did, and from the people he did it for." Thessaly's hands clenched into fists. "You moved my sick mother to another country without asking me. You've isolated me here with rules and security and... Why? Why me specifically? You're a billionaire. You could have any woman you want. Why stalk a broke college student for 6 months and then spend $50 million to own her?" Something flickered across Cadogan's face, too quick to read, gone before she could identify it. "I told you," I intervened. "That's not an answer. It's the only answer you're getting today." He picked up the tablet again, but his movements were too controlled, too careful. "You should eat. Then we'll—" "No!" Thessaly crossed the space between them, invading his carefully maintained distance. "You don't get to play mysterious benefactor. You bought me. You imprisoned me in luxury. The least you owe me is the truth. Why did you do this?" For a long moment, Cadogan just looked at her, his winter storm eyes unreadable. Then he set the tablet down again and pulled up something on his phone. When he turned the screen toward her, she saw a photograph, grainy, clearly taken with a hidden camera. It showed a clinical room with white walls and medical equipment. In the foreground, paperwork with her full name, her medical history, her photograph, and in smaller text, a contract outlining something that made the words blur together. Egg harvesting schedules, insemination protocols, pregnancy quotas, behavioral conditioning methods. You were being sold to an illegal surrogacy operation, Cadogan said, his voice flat with suppressed emotion. They run facilities in international waters, technically legal in the jurisdictions they exploit. Wealthy clients pay millions for designer children from genetically suitable women. The women themselves are kept for years, sometimes decades. Pregnant continuously, chemically compliant. Your stepfather sold you to them for $8 million. I paid $50 million to outbid them. The tablet slipped from Thessaly's numb fingers. She made it 3 steps toward the bathroom before her stomach revolted, and she vomited into the sink. Once, twice, until there was nothing left but dry heaves and the taste of horror. She felt Cadogan behind her before he touched her, his hand gentle on her back as he held her hair away from her face with surprising tenderness. He didn't speak, just handed her a towel when she finally stopped shaking. "You're safe now," he said quietly. "That's all that matters. Now we know what Cadogan saved her from. Does that justify how he did it? Can a good outcome excuse a bad method? Should Thessaly feel grateful or angry right now? What do you think?" Thessaly wiped her mouth with trembling hands and caught his reflection in the mirror. "Let me see the photo again." His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "You've seen enough. Let me see it." Reluctantly, he pulled the phone back out. Thessaly took it this time, studying the image with the clinical distance of shock. The medical equipment, the contracts with their obscene quotas, and there, in the background of the photograph, partially visible through a doorway, another woman on a gurney, blonde, unconscious, IV lines running into both arms. "Who is she?" Thessaly asked. Cadogan took the phone back so quickly he almost dropped it. "No one you need to worry about. There's another woman in that facility, and you only bought me. Thessaly, who is she?" His expression shuttered completely, that brief flash of humanity disappearing behind walls of ice and control. "You're safe now. That's all that matters. Get dressed. Eat breakfast. I'll be back after my meeting, and we'll continue this conversation then." He left before she could argue, his footsteps precise and measured down the hallway. Thessaly stood alone in the bathroom, still holding the towel, and stared at her reflection. The platinum band gleamed on her finger. Outside, Puget Sound stretched grey and infinite, and somewhere in her husband's carefully controlled expression, she'd seen something that looked almost like guilt. 2 weeks passed in a strange suspension of reality. Thessaly woke each morning in the master suite, overlooking water that changed from grey to silver to steel, depending on the weather. She ate breakfast in a dining room designed for 12, always alone. She explored the estate's 10 acres, the gardens with their precisely maintained paths, the private beach, the greenhouse where someone grew exotic orchids she was apparently allowed to enjoy but not touch. Everything was available to her except the thing she wanted most: answers. Cadogan was a ghost in his own home. He left before dawn for his downtown Seattle headquarters, running his renewable energy empire from a building she'd seen only in photographs. Sometimes he returned for dinner, eating across from her with perfect politeness while discussing nothing of substance: the weather, the quality of the chef's preparations, whether she needed anything. Always that question: did she need anything? As if material comfort could substitute for human connection. Most nights, he didn't come home at all. She'd hear his car in the early hours, the quiet sound of his footsteps as he went directly to his study. She'd wake at 3 or 4 in the morning and see the light beneath his door, knowing he was in there working, existing 10 feet away but completely unreachable. He'd given her everything except himself. The security team rotated in shifts, polite, professional men and women who accompanied her anywhere she wanted to go within Washington state. She'd tested the boundaries once, asking to visit Seattle. They'd driven her, waited outside while she wandered Pike Place Market like a tourist, then brought her back to her gilded cage. She had unlimited money, unlimited access to everything except freedom and truth. She discovered Sylvain by accident on the 8th day. Thessaly had been reading in the conservatory when she felt the weight of being watched. She looked up to find a small face peering around the doorframe, a girl maybe 7 years old, with dark hair like Cadogan's and enormous eyes that seemed too large for her pale face. The child stared at her with an intensity that was disturbingly familiar, then vanished the moment Thessaly smiled at her. After that she saw the girl everywhere, watching from the upstairs landing when Thessaly crossed the foyer, peeking through the garden hedges when she walked the grounds. Always silent, always disappearing the moment Thessaly acknowledged her presence. Mr. Renvale's daughter from his first marriage, one of the housekeepers finally explained when Thessaly asked. Miss Sylvain. She lives in the East Wing with her nanny, keeps to herself mostly, doesn't talk much. Cadogan had a daughter, a child he'd never mentioned, who lived in the same house like another ghost, another piece of his life he kept carefully compartmentalized. Thessaly spent an afternoon in the estate's pristine kitchen, teaching herself to make chocolate chip cookies from the recipe her grandmother had used. The chef watched with barely concealed horror as she made a mess of his domain, but he didn't stop her. She arranged the best cookies on a plate and walked to the East Wing, her heart beating harder than the simple gesture warranted. The nanny intercepted her before she reached Sylvain's room. Mrs. Kelch was a stern woman in her 60s, with iron-grey hair and the demeanor of a prison warden. She appeared in the hallway like a summoned guardian, positioning herself physically between Thessaly and the door where she could hear the quiet sound of a child playing. Mrs. Renvale. The title sounded like an accusation. Can I help you? I made cookies for Sylvain. Thessaly held up the plate, suddenly feeling foolish. I thought she might like... That won't be possible. Mrs. Kelch's expression didn't change. Mr. Renvale has given specific instructions. You're not to interact with the child. The words hit like a slap. I'm sorry, what? Mr. Renvale has made it very clear that Miss Sylvain's routine is not to be disrupted. She has a schedule, educational requirements, therapeutic appointments. She doesn't need complications. I'm not a complication. Thessaly stopped, because what was she, his wife? She was a woman he'd purchased and installed in his house with explicit orders not to touch his daughter. I just wanted to say hello. That won't be necessary. Mrs. Kelch reached out and took the plate of cookies with the efficiency of someone confiscating contraband. I'll see that she gets these, but in the future, please respect Mr. Renvale's boundaries regarding his daughter. It's for her protection. Protection from what? From basic human kindness? From acknowledgement? But Mrs. Kelch had already dismissed her, turning back toward Sylvain's room with the cookies, leaving Thessaly standing alone in the hallway, feeling like she'd been classified as a threat. She made it back to the master suite before the anger hit, white-hot and clarifying. That night, Thessaly didn't eat the dinner the chef prepared. She waited in the darkened living room until she heard Cadogan's car in the drive, until she heard his footsteps in the foyer. He walked past without turning on the lights, heading straight for his study like he always did, and she stepped out of the shadows to intercept him. We need to talk. He stopped, his hand on the study door, and turned to face her. Even in the dim light from the hallway, she could see the exhaustion in his features, the shadows under his eyes, the tension in his shoulders. The man worked himself like a machine. It's late, Thessaly. Can this wait until... No. She crossed the space between them, and he actually stepped back slightly, as if proximity was dangerous. You gave me everything except humanity. Designer clothes and gourmet food and art I like, and books I love, but you won't let me speak to your daughter. You won't tell me why you really bought me. You won't even eat dinner with me most nights. What am I to you? A decoration? A trophy to prove you could outbid human traffickers? Something cracked in his careful composure. He looked at her with such raw, unguarded longing that it stole the breath from her lungs, a hunger so intense it was almost frightening. For 3 heartbeats, she saw past all his walls to something desperate and aching and profoundly human. Then he shuttered it, turned away and walked into his study without a word. The door closed between them with a quiet click that sounded like finality. Thessaly stood there, shaking with anger and confusion, and something else she didn't want to name, something that had sparked to life in the space of that look, that moment of vulnerability before he'd hidden it away again. She almost left, almost went back upstairs to the master suite and the comfortable prison he'd built for her. Instead, she tried the study door. It opened. Cadogan had gone through to the attached bathroom. She could hear water running. The study itself was exactly what she'd expected. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, a massive desk with multiple monitors, papers organized with obsessive precision. And there, slightly ajar in a way that suggested he'd been looking at something before coming home and had forgotten to secure it properly, a locked drawer in the desk. Thessaly crossed to it before she could talk herself out of it. Inside, she found photographs. Dozens of them. All of her. Her sitting in a coffee shop near campus, studying with her laptop open, walking to her old job at the campus bookstore, her backpack slung over one shoulder, getting her mail from the apartment building she'd lived in before her stepfather sold her, laughing with friends at a bar she'd gone to exactly twice. The photographs were high quality, clearly taken with professional equipment, documenting months of her life in minute detail. Her hands shook as she sorted through them, seeing her existence catalogued like evidence. Some were candid shots taken from a distance. Others were close enough that whoever took them had been standing near her, invisible in her daily life. The most recent photo was dated 2 days before the auction. She was leaving her morning class, squinting in unexpected sunlight, completely unaware that her entire life was about to detonate. The stylist arrived at 9 in the morning with an entourage and enough equipment to stage a military operation. Thessaly endured 3 hours of preparation, hair, makeup, the kind of detailed work that transformed her into someone magazine-ready. The gown was midnight blue silk that clung to her body like water, with a neckline that made her feel exposed and powerful simultaneously. When she looked in the mirror, she barely recognized herself. "Mr. Renvale requested this color specifically," the stylist said, making final adjustments. "He has excellent taste." Of course he did. He'd probably known exactly how she'd look in this dress before she'd ever tried it on. The same way he'd known her tea preference and her favorite books and what she looked like walking to class on a Wednesday morning. She'd spent 2 days trying not to think about the photographs hidden in his study, the evidence of his obsession catalogued in a drawer. They hadn't spoken since their confrontation. He'd left early each morning and returned after she was supposedly asleep, though she heard him working through the nights, a ghost in his own home. Now he stood in the foyer wearing a tuxedo that probably cost more than a car, looking at her with an expression she couldn't read. "You look beautiful," he said, and it sounded like an admission of something. The Renewable Energy Summit was held at a waterfront hotel in Bellevue, all glass and steel and views of Lake Washington. They arrived together, his hand barely touching her lower back as they navigated the entrance where photographers documented their arrival. She'd been briefed by his PR team. Smile, stay close, play the devoted new wife. Thessaly had smiled and thought about how she was becoming exactly what she'd accused him of wanting, a beautiful decoration on his arm. Inside, the gala was exactly what she'd expected. Powerful people in expensive clothes, networking with surgical precision. Everyone wanted Cadogan's attention, his investment, his approval. They treated Thessaly like royalty by association, their smiles bright and empty as they congratulated her on the marriage and asked nothing of substance. She stood beside her husband, feeling like an imposter, playing a role in a production she hadn't auditioned for. Cadogan, for his part, was in his element, cold, commanding, brilliant. He discussed renewable infrastructure and carbon offset markets with the casual authority of someone who'd revolutionized an entire industry. People gravitated toward him, and he acknowledged them with minimal warmth, his hand occasionally returning to her back as if she might disappear without that anchoring touch. She was contemplating escape to the bathroom when she met Corson Wright. He intercepted her at the bar, all easy charm and genuine smile, while Cadogan was occupied with a senator 3 yards away. "You look like you're contemplating which window to jump from," he said, ordering 2 glasses of champagne and offering her one. "I'm Corson. I run a climate tech startup that's probably going to fail spectacularly, but at least I'll fail while trying to save the world. And you're the woman who somehow convinced the iceberg himself to get married. I'm deeply impressed." Thessaly laughed. Actually laughed. For the first time in weeks. "The iceberg? Your husband. Brilliant, terrifying, and almost certainly capable of sinking ships. No offense. None taken. I barely know him." Something flickered in Corson's expression, surprise or curiosity, but he recovered smoothly. "Then let me distract you with passionate opinions about carbon capture technology and why most of these people are funding the wrong solutions." They talked for 20 minutes, and it was gloriously normal. Corson was funny and smart and genuinely passionate about environmental justice, the kind of person she would have befriended at university. They debated the ethics of geoengineering, laughed about the absurdity of billionaires launching vanity space projects while the planet burned, discovered they'd both studied under the same environmental economics professor. For 20 perfect minutes, Thessaly forgot she was a purchased bride at a performance and just existed as herself. Then Cadogan's hand landed on her lower back, and the temperature dropped 10 degrees. "Mr. Wright." His voice was arctic. "I trust you're enjoying the evening." Corson's easy smile faltered slightly. "Mr. Renvale. Yes, your wife and I were just discussing. I'm sure it was fascinating." Cadogan's hand pressed more firmly against Thessaly's spine, possessive and unmistakable. "Unfortunately, there are several people Thessaly needs to meet. If you'll excuse us." It wasn't a request. Corson recognized the dismissal immediately, his expression shifting to something careful and slightly alarmed. "Of course, Thessaly, it was wonderful meeting you." He retreated quickly, disappearing into the crowd like he'd been threatened. Thessaly turned on Cadogan, fury building. "That was incredibly rude. We're leaving." He was already guiding her toward the exit, his movements controlled but urgent. "The gala isn't over. Now." They made it to the car before she exploded. The driver pulled away from the hotel, and Thessaly rounded on Cadogan in the back seat. "What the hell was that? You ignore me for 2 weeks, parade me around like a trophy, and then act like a jealous husband the first time I have a normal conversation. That wasn't a conversation. That was him circling you like prey. He was being nice. Something you might consider trying occasionally." Cadogan's control cracked, his voice raw with something dangerous. "Do you have any idea what it did to me? Watching you smile at him the way you've never smiled at me? Watching you light up for a stranger when you barely look at me, because you don't let me look at you. You hide in your study. You forbid me from meeting your daughter. You keep me in that house like one of those photographs you took of me. Something to observe and control but never actually touch." The car swerved slightly as the driver reacted to the tension. Cadogan leaned forward. "Pull over." "Sir." "Pull over. Now." They were on a cliffside road overlooking the Sound. The driver stopped at an overlook, and Cadogan immediately activated the privacy screen, sealing them in the back seat. The sudden silence was deafening. "You don't get to own my smiles," Thessaly said, her voice shaking with anger and something more complicated. "You don't get to own me, don't I?" He moved closer, and she could see his chest rising with ragged breaths, his careful control completely shattered. "You wear my ring. You live in my house. You signed a contract that binds you to me. A contract I never wanted. But you're here anyway. And you felt it too, didn't you? When he was making you laugh, when you were being yourself with him, you felt guilty, like you were betraying something. Her breath caught because he was right, and she hated that he was right. That doesn't mean... He leaned in, stopping inches from her lips. She could feel his breath, see the storm in his eyes, the careful facade completely demolished. Tell me you don't feel this. Tell me you don't wonder what we could be if circumstances were different. Tell me you don't think about me the way I think about you every moment of every day. Thessaly's heart hammered against her ribs. She should push him away, should remind him that he'd bought her, stalked her, trapped her, but her body had different ideas, swaying toward him like gravity. The words died because she couldn't say it, couldn't voice the denial when heat was pooling in her stomach and her hands were trembling with the effort of not touching him. For one suspended moment she thought he'd kiss her, wanted him to kiss her, despite everything. Instead, Cadogan pulled back abruptly, his expression shuddering. He knocked on the privacy screen twice. "Take us home." The rest of the drive passed in silence, so charged it felt like a living thing between them. Thessaly pressed against her door, trying to slow her racing pulse. Cadogan stared straight ahead, his jaw tight, his hands clenched. Neither of them noticed what they'd left behind at the gala. A woman in a red dress who'd watched their exit with hatred burning in her eyes. She'd stood at the window overlooking the parking area, her phone pressed to her ear, whispering urgently to someone while Cadogan's car disappeared into the night. The woman smiled as she ended the call. Whatever game was being played, new pieces were moving into position. Sleep was impossible. Thessaly lay in the master suite staring at the ceiling, replaying the moment in the car when Cadogan had been inches from her lips, when her entire body had betrayed her by wanting something she had no business wanting. The man had stalked her, bought her, trapped her in this estate, and yet her pulse still raced, remembering the devastation in his voice when he'd asked if she felt it too. At 2 a.m, she gave up and pulled on a robe, wandering the estate's darkened hallways like another ghost in this house full of them. She found herself in the conservatory without consciously choosing the destination, drawn to the glass room where moonlight filtered through exotic plants and created shadows that felt almost alive. That's where she found Sylvain. The girl sat curled in one of the wicker chairs, her small body folded into itself, crying with the quiet, practiced silence of a child who'd learned that making noise brought unwanted attention. She wore pajamas with stars on them and clutched a stuffed rabbit that had seen better days. Thessaly's heart cracked clean through. "Sylvain?" She kept her voice soft, remembering how the girl always ran. "Are you okay, sweetheart?" The child looked up, with eyes swollen from crying, Cadogan's eyes, that same winter storm grey. For a moment, Thessaly thought she'd bolt. Instead, Sylvain just stared at her with an expression far too old for 7 years. "I'm not supposed to talk to you," she whispered. "Mrs. Kelch said." "Mrs. Kelch isn't here." Thessaly moved slowly, settling into the chair across from her like she was approaching a frightened animal. "It's just us. You can talk to me if you want to." Silence stretched between them, broken only by Sylvain's hitching breaths. Then, so quietly, Thessaly almost missed it. "Are you going to leave like my mummy did?" The question destroyed something in Thessaly's chest. She leaned forward, wishing she could gather this broken little girl into her arms. "No, honey. I'm not leaving. Everyone leaves." Sylvain hugged her rabbit tighter. "Mummy left, and Daddy says she went to heaven, but I heard Mrs. Kelch tell the other nanny that Mummy ran away because Daddy scared her, that she couldn't take it anymore, that she chose to leave me behind. Oh, God." Thessaly's hands trembled as understanding crashed over her. Cadogan's first wife hadn't died. She'd fled. Abandoned her own daughter to escape whatever Cadogan had done to her. The same controlling, obsessive behavior he was trying so hard not to inflict on Thessaly. "Your daddy didn't scare your mummy away," Thessaly said, though she had no idea if that was true. Sometimes grown-ups have problems that have nothing to do with their kids. But I promise you, Sylvain, I'm not going anywhere. Okay? Sylvain studied her with those two knowing eyes, searching for lies. Whatever she found seemed to satisfy her, because she nodded slowly. Okay. They sat together in the moonlit conservatory for another 20 minutes, not talking, just existing in shared space until Sylvain's eyes grew heavy. Thessaly walked her back to the east wing, ignoring the voice in her head that sounded like Mrs. Kelch's disapproval, and tucked the girl into bed. "Will you be here tomorrow?" Sylvain asked sleepily. "I'll be here." The next morning, Thessaly waited in the breakfast room until Cadogan appeared at 7, looking like he'd slept as poorly as she had. He stopped when he saw her, coffee cup halfway to his lips. "Your wife didn't die," Thessaly said without preamble. "She left you, and your daughter knows." The cup lowered slowly. Cadogan's face went carefully blank in that way she'd learned meant he was hiding something enormous. "You spoke to Sylvain. She was crying alone at 2 in the morning. Yes, I spoke to her, I comforted her, and she told me that her mother ran away because you scared her." Thessaly stood, crossing to him. "What did you do, Cadogan? What did you do that made a woman abandon her own child to escape you?" For a long moment he said nothing. Then he set the coffee down with meticulous care and sank into a chair like his legs wouldn't hold him anymore. "Elara didn't die," he said finally, his voice stripped of its usual control. "She left me 3 years ago. Left both of us." "Why?" He looked at her with such raw vulnerability it hurt to witness. "Because I was obsessive, controlling. There was a kidnapping attempt, someone trying to get leverage over me through her. She was terrified. And he ran a hand through his hair, destroying its usual perfect order. I tried to protect her. Security details everywhere. Trackers on her phone, her car. I monitored her movements, vetted her friends, restricted where she could go. I thought I was keeping her safe. Instead, I suffocated her." Thessaly's breath caught as understanding crystallized. She couldn't breathe. She couldn't exist. Every protective measure was another prison bar, until finally she couldn't take it anymore. She left in the middle of the night and never came back. Abandoned Sylvain because staying meant, his voice cracked, because staying with me was worse than losing her daughter. The confession hung between them like something bleeding. Thessaly should have felt vindicated, should have used this ammunition against him. Instead, she just felt sad for all of them. Elara, trapped and desperate, Sylvain, abandoned, and Cadogan, destroying what he loved most, trying to protect it. "Is that what you're doing to me?" she asked quietly, trying not to repeat the same mistakes. "Yes." He looked up at her, and his eyes were devastated. "I'm trying to give you space, freedom within the constraints. But God help me, Thessaly, every instinct I have screams to lock you away, where no one can hurt you, where no one can take you from me, where you're safe and mine and—" He stopped, breathing hard. "I'm trying not to be the monster that drove my wife away, but I don't know if I can be anything else." Thessaly opened her mouth to respond, to say what she didn't know, when Cadogan's phone buzzed with an encrypted notification. She saw his eyes track to the screen, watched the color drain completely from his face. He stood, abruptly, the chair scraping against tile. "I need to— excuse me, Cadogan." But he was already gone, striding toward his study with the rigid posture of someone preparing for battle. She heard the door lock behind him, heard the muffled sound of his voice on a call, urgent and sharp, with something that sounded like fear. Thessaly stood alone in the breakfast room, her mind racing. Whatever message he'd received had shaken him to his core. The shift happened gradually, like ice melting. Cadogan emerged from his study 2 hours after receiving that mysterious message, his expression carefully neutral, and found Thessaly reading in the conservatory. He stood in the doorway for a long moment before speaking. "You can spend time with Sylvain," he said quietly. "If you want to. I'll inform Mrs. Kelch." Thessaly looked up from her book. "What changed your mind? You stayed with her when she was crying. You didn't have to do that. You could have walked away. But you didn't. Something vulnerable flickered across his face. She needs someone who stays. So Thessaly became a fixture in the East Wing. At first, Sylvain remained cautious, watching her with those two old eyes, testing whether this adult would also disappear. But Thessaly kept showing up, bringing books to read together, coaxing her into the garden, teaching her to bake cookies in the pristine kitchen, while the chef pretended not to hover protectively over his domain. Slowly, miraculously, the little girl began to bloom. She laughed, a startled, rusty sound at first, like she'd forgotten how. She played, building elaborate fairy gardens in the conservatory and narrating complex stories about their imaginary inhabitants. She started talking more, asking questions, seeking Thessaly out when she woke from nightmares that still plagued her nights. "I dreamed." Mummy came back. Sylvain whispered one afternoon, curled against Thessaly's side on the conservatory sofa. But when I hugged her, she turned into smoke and disappeared. And it was my fault, because I wasn't good enough to make her stay. Thessaly's heart shattered. She pulled the girl closer, pressing a kiss to her dark hair. "Oh, sweetheart, your mummy leaving had nothing to do with you. Nothing. You were perfect then, and you're perfect now. Sometimes grown-ups make choices that hurt the people they love, but that's their choice, not your fault. Do you promise?" "I promise, and I promise I'm not going anywhere. You're stuck with me." Sylvain's small arms tightened around her waist, and Thessaly felt the weight of that trust like something sacred. She didn't notice Cadogan watching from the doorway until Sylvain had fallen asleep against her shoulder. When she looked up, he was there, his expression unreadable but his eyes stormy with emotion. He didn't speak, just stood there for a long moment before disappearing like a ghost. But he started appearing more after that, in doorways, at the edge of rooms, watching his daughter laugh with something that looked like wonder mixed with grief. The family dinner happened by accident. Thessaly and Sylvain were eating in the breakfast room, grilled cheese and tomato soup, comfort food the chef had prepared with visible reluctance. When Cadogan came home early, he stopped in the doorway, still wearing his suit, looking at them like he'd stumbled into someone else's life. "Daddy," Sylvain brightened immediately. "Thess made me grilled cheese. It's cut into triangles. I see that." His voice was soft in a way Thessaly had never heard. "Do you want some?" Thessaly asked before she could overthink it. "There's plenty." He hesitated, clearly calculating whether he belonged in this moment. Then, "Yes, I'd like that." It was awkward, Cadogan eating grilled cheese at the breakfast table while Sylvain chattered about her day, clearly unused to having her father's full attention. But it was also sweet, watching him try to navigate normal family interaction with the same focused intensity he probably applied to board meetings. He asked questions about the fairy garden, listened to Sylvain's elaborate story about the Fairy Queen's war with the Dragon King, even smiled, small and genuine, when his daughter laughed at her own joke. When Sylvain finally went to bed, after extracting promises from both of them that they'd still be there in the morning, Thessaly and Cadogan were left alone in the living room. The silence stretched, but it felt different than before, less hostile, more uncertain. "Thank you," Cadogan said finally, staring at the fireplace where flames cast moving shadows, "for what you're doing with her. She's happier than I've seen her in years. She's a wonderful kid. She just needed someone to spend time with. Something I've proven spectacularly bad at providing." He moved to the window, hands in his pockets, shoulders tight. "I built her from nothing. Started in foster care, 15 different homes before I aged out. Worked 3 jobs while getting my degree. Fought my way into rooms where no one wanted me, made myself indispensable, then irreplaceable, then untouchable." He turned to face her. "But none of that taught me how to love without consuming, how to want someone without destroying them. I don't know how to do this, Thessaly. This," he gestured between them, "whatever this is becoming." Thessaly stood, crossing to him. Her heart pounded, but she reached out and took his hand. His fingers were cold, trembling slightly. "Then let me teach you," she said quietly. He looked at her like she'd offered him salvation and damnation in the same breath. Then he kissed her. It was nothing like she'd imagined, not aggressive or controlling, but slow and desperate, full of months of tension and longing and fear. His hands came up to frame her face with a reverence that made her breath catch, touching her like she was something holy he might break. Thessaly's hands found his shoulders, pulling him closer, and he made a sound low in his throat that went straight to her core. He deepened the kiss, backing her against the window, and she felt the cold glass against her spine, contrasting with the heat of his body. He pulled her into his lap as he sank onto the nearby sofa, hands trembling as they traced her jawline, her throat, the curve of her shoulder. Through his shirt, she felt the hard planes of muscle, the racing of his heart that matched her own. Her fingers found the top button of his shirt, and that's when she felt it, raised scar tissue on his shoulder, a peculiar shape that made her pull back slightly. She pushed the fabric aside and saw it clearly. A bullet wound, old but unmistakable. "What happened?" she asked, her hand hovering over the scar. Something shuttered in his expression. Old business rival. Nothing to worry about. But his voice carried that too careful tone she'd learned meant he was hiding something. And his eyes held something dark and complicated that had nothing to do with business rivalries. Before she could press further, he kissed her again, clearly using distraction as deflection. And it worked. She melted into him, into the desperate intensity of his touch, into the feeling of being wanted this completely. Then he stopped. He pulled back, breathing hard, his forehead resting against hers. "Not like this," he said roughly. "Not until you choose me because you want to. Not because you're trapped here. Not until you're free to leave, and choose to stay anyway." Thessaly's entire body ached with wanting him, but something in her chest cracked open at the raw honesty in his voice. "What if I'm already choosing?" she whispered. "Then choose me again tomorrow. And the day after. Choose me when you're free to choose anything else." He stood, gently setting her aside, and she could see the cost of that control in every rigid line of his body. "Good night, Thessaly." He left her there, trembling and confused and wanting, while somewhere in his study an encrypted phone buzzed with another message he wouldn't explain. The Seattle aquarium trip was Sylvain's idea. She'd been talking about the octopus exhibit for days, and Thessaly had finally secured Cadogan's permission to take her. 2 security guards shadowed them at a discreet distance as Sylvain pressed her face against the glass tanks, narrating elaborate stories about the fish she saw. For a few hours, Thessaly felt almost normal, like maybe she was becoming the mother this little girl desperately needed. They were watching jellyfish pulse through blue-lit water when Thessaly felt the prickling awareness of being watched. She turned to find a woman standing 3 feet away, studying her with the clinical interest of an entomologist examining a pinned butterfly. The woman from the gala. The one in red. Today, she wore cream cashmere and understated jewelry that probably cost more than a house. She was stunning in that maintained, ageless way that money could buy, somewhere between 35 and 45, with platinum blonde hair and eyes the color of glacial ice. Everything about her screamed controlled power. "Thessaly Renvale," she said, her voice cultured and sharp. "I've been wanting to meet you properly." Thessaly instinctively moved closer to Sylvain, who'd gone quiet and watchful. "Do I know you?" "Valeth Crane. I'm Cadogan's former business partner." She smiled, and it was all edges. "Among other things, we worked very closely together for years, built his empire side by side, really." One of the security guards was moving toward them, speaking quietly into his radio. Valeth noticed and spoke faster. "Has he told you why he really bought you?" She tilted her head, studying Thessaly's face. "It wasn't to save you, darling. It was to replace me." The words hit like a slap. "I don't know what you're—" "Of course you don't. He wouldn't tell you." Vailith reached into her bag and pulled out a small USB drive, pressing it into Thessaly's hand before security could intercept. "Watch this, before you fall any deeper. You deserve to know what you're really a substitute for. Ma'am, you need to step back." The security guard had arrived, positioning himself between them. Vailith's ice-chip eyes never left Thessaly's face. "He destroyed me, darling, and he'll destroy you too. It's what he does to the things he loves." Then she disappeared into the crowd with practiced ease, leaving Thessaly standing there with a USB drive burning in her palm and Sylvain's small hand clutching her other one. "Who was that lady?" Sylvain asked quietly. She felt scary. "No one important, sweetheart." Thessaly forced a smile she didn't feel. "Let's go see the octopus." But the day was ruined. All she could think about was the USB drive, hidden in her pocket, and Vailith's words echoing in her head. "It was to replace me." That night, after Sylvain was asleep and Cadogan was locked in his study working, Thessaly sat in the master suite with her laptop and that damned USB drive. Her hands shook as she inserted it. The file contained security footage time-stamped 6 months ago, before Cadogan had ever bid on her, before her stepfather had sold her, when she'd still been a college student worried about normal things like exams and rent. The footage showed Cadogan's office, all glass and steel and city views. He stood by the window while Vailith paced like a caged animal, her perfect composure shattered. "You can't just buy a replacement for what we had." Her voice was raw with fury and grief. 5 years, Cadogan. 5 years of building this together, of being what you needed. What I needed was a partner, not a possessive obsession. Cadogan's voice was cold, but the camera caught his clenched fists. "You tried to fire Sylvain's nanny because you were jealous of the time I spent with my own daughter. You sabotaged deals because I wouldn't prioritize you over everything else. This isn't love, Vailith. It's sickness. I was devoted to you. You were consuming me. The same way I consumed Ilara. We're both damaged and together we're toxic." "So what?" Vailith's laugh was bitter. "You'll just find some fresh victim who doesn't know better, someone you can train to replace me? I'll find someone who actually deserves my devotion." His voice was quiet but devastating. "Someone who needs someone to fight for them. Someone who—" The slap echoed in the footage. Vailith's hand connected with his face hard enough to snap his head to the side. "You'll destroy her, just like you destroyed me," she said, her voice shaking. "It's what you do. You love things to death, and then you're surprised when they stop breathing." The footage ended. Thessaly sat in the dark, tears streaming down her face, that conversation playing on repeat in her mind. "I'll find someone who actually deserves my devotion, someone who needs someone to fight for them." 6 months ago. He'd said those words 6 months ago, and then he'd started watching her, documenting her life, preparing to make her his next project. She was still sitting there when Cadogan opened the bedroom door at 1 in the morning, clearly looking for her. He stopped when he saw her face, saw the laptop, saw the USB drive on the bed beside her. "Was I just a substitute?" Thessaly's voice broke. "A rebound from your obsession with her? You said you'd find someone who deserves your devotion, and 6 months later you bought me. Tell me that's a coincidence." Fury transformed his features, not directed at her, but volcanic and barely contained. "Vailith gave you that footage? Answer the question." "Yes." The word exploded from him. "Yes, I was looking for someone after I ended things with Vailith. Looking for a chance to do things right this time instead of destroying someone else with my inability to love like a normal person. And when I saw your file, when I saw your face and read about your stepfather's debts and realized what was about to happen to you—" He stopped, running his hands through his hair. "You looked like you needed someone to fight for you. And maybe, God help me, I saw a chance at redemption." The honesty cut deeper than lies would have. Thessaly pressed her hand to her mouth, trying to hold back a sob. Cadogan crossed to her, dropping to his knees in front of where she sat. "But Thessaly, what I feel for you now has nothing to do with her. Vayleth was my COO, my lover for 5 years. We built my company together. But she became increasingly possessive, unstable. She tried to sabotage my relationship with Sylvain because she was jealous of any attention I gave my own daughter. I ended things, and she's been waging corporate war against me ever since. That doesn't change why you bought me. No, it doesn't. He took her hands, his grip desperate. I won't lie to you. When I saw your auction file, part of me was looking for a way to prove I could be different, that I could protect someone without destroying them. But his voice broke, raw and unguarded. What I feel for you now isn't about redemption or replacement or any of that. You're not a substitute for Vayleth. You're not a project to fix my broken soul. You're... He stopped, breathing hard, and when he looked at her, his eyes held something so intense it stole her breath. You're the original, he said quietly, and everyone before you was just a poor imitation of something I didn't even know I was looking for. I see that now. Vayleth, Ilara. I was trying to make them into something they weren't. But you... His hands tightened on hers. You're exactly who I need, exactly who you are. And what terrifies me is that you're also exactly who I could destroy if I'm not careful. The space between them felt electric, charged with months of tension, finally given permission to ignite. Thessaly stood first, her hand still trembling in his, and pulled Cadogan to his feet. No words. They'd spent enough time on words. She led him from the master suite, down the hall to his bedroom, a space she'd never entered before. It was stark and beautiful, all clean lines and floor-to-ceiling windows that framed Puget Sound like living art. Moonlight spilled across hardwood floors and the massive bed that dominated the space. Everything was shades of grey and black, monochromatic except for the silver light, painting everything ethereal. Part of her, the cynical part that had been sold and trapped and controlled, whispered doubts as she looked at him. He was 48, 26 years older than her. She'd seen the silver threading through his dark hair, the lines at the corners of his eyes. He kept himself maintained with the resources unlimited wealth provided, but reality was reality. Men his age weren't exactly known for stamina or passion. She'd heard her friends joke about older boyfriends who were all talk and disappointing follow-through. This would probably be brief and mechanical, adequate at best. She was doing this for the emotional connection, she told herself, for the intimacy of choosing him, not because she expected to be satisfied. Cadogan stopped in the doorway, giving her one last chance to retreat. Thessaly. She turned and kissed him, swallowing whatever caveat he'd been about to offer. His response was immediate, his hands coming up to cradle her face with that trembling reverence she was learning meant he was fighting for control. What happened next shattered every assumption she'd ever made. The dress fell away under his careful hands, pooling at her feet like water. His shirt followed, and that's when she saw him fully, the body he kept hidden under expensive suits. This wasn't the soft, declining physique she'd expected. Broad shoulders, defined muscle, the evidence of wealth spent on serious maintenance. He was built like someone half his age, powerful and controlled. He lifted her easily, and there was a statement in that casual strength, crossing to the bed, laying her down on sheets that smelled like him. Moonlight painted her skin silver, and he stopped just to look at her, his eyes storming with emotion. "You think I'll disappoint you," he said quietly, reading her face with that unnerving perception. "You think my age means I can't give you what you need." Heat flooded her cheeks at being so transparent. His smile was dark and promising. "Let me prove you wrong." Then he destroyed her. There was no other word for it. His mouth traced paths across her skin with the patience of someone who'd learned that the journey mattered more than the destination. Her throat, her collarbone, the curve of her breast. But unlike fumbling younger men she'd been with, he knew exactly what he was doing. Every touch was deliberate, calculated, designed for maximum impact. He found sensitive places she hadn't known existed and exploited them with ruthless efficiency. When she gasped and arched beneath him, he made a low sound of satisfaction and continued his methodical campaign. His hands followed where his mouth had been, and she realized with startling clarity that experience wasn't a liability, it was a devastating weapon. He'd had decades to perfect this, to learn what worked, to develop the patience younger men lacked. Cadogan, his name came out desperate, pleading. Not yet. His voice was rough against her skin. You'll come apart for me first. I want to watch. And he made good on that promise, with the focused intensity he probably applied to hostile takeovers. Unlike younger lovers who'd rush toward their own satisfaction, he seemed content to spend hours learning her body, reading her responses, adjusting his approach based on what made her breath hitch or her fingers clutch at the sheets. When she finally shattered, the first time, it was so intense she actually cried out his name, her body arching off the bed, waves of pleasure rolling through her with an intensity she'd never experienced. He held her through it, watching her face with dark satisfaction. Again, he murmured, you're going to come apart for me at least twice more before I'm inside you. She would have protested that it was impossible, but he was already proving her wrong. His stamina was shocking, the stamina of someone who maintained himself like an athlete, who had the patience of experience and the resources for enhancement if he needed it. Though from the evidence pressing against her thigh, enhancement wasn't necessary. The second time she broke apart, she was incoherent, trembling. Any thoughts of inadequacy or disappointment burned away under the evidence of his complete mastery of her body. When he finally moved over her, braced on his forearms, his eyes found hers in the darkness. Tell me you want this, he said roughly. Tell me you choose this. I choose this. Her hands found his face, pulling him down. I choose you. The first moment of connection stole the breath from both of them. Cadogan made a sound low in his throat that was almost pained, dropping his forehead to hers, his entire body trembling with restraint. And then he showed her exactly what decades of experience meant. He controlled the pace with absolute authority, slow enough to make her desperate, deep enough to make her see stars. Every movement was deliberate, angled precisely to hit places that made her gasp and clutch at him. He read her body like a language he'd spent years learning, adjusting rhythm and depth based on her responses. Look at me, he commanded when her eyes started to close. I want to see your face when you come apart again. The combination of his voice and his movements and the sheer overwhelming intimacy of it pushed her over the edge for the third time. She shattered while staring into his winter storm eyes, and the intensity of it was transcendent. Not just physical, something deeper, something that reached into her chest and rearranged her entire understanding of what this could be. Only then did he allow himself to follow her, and even that was controlled. He held her face and kept eye contact and made sure she watched him break apart, made sure she saw how thoroughly she devastated him. Afterward, Thessaly lay boneless and trembling, her entire body humming with satisfaction she hadn't known was possible. Cadogan pulled her against his chest, his hand stroking her hair with surprising gentleness, and she tried to process what had just happened. Every assumption had been wrong. Catastrophically, perfectly wrong. She'd expected brief and mechanical. Instead, he'd taken his time, unhurried and thorough. She'd expected disappointing stamina. Instead, he'd outlasted her by miles, making her come apart 3 times before even allowing himself release. She'd expected fumbling uncertainty. Instead, he'd played her body like an instrument he'd mastered, every touch deliberate and devastating. The men closer to her age that she'd been with before, they seemed like boys now, enthusiastic but clumsy, rushing toward their own satisfaction without the skill or patience to bring her along. Cadogan had approached her pleasure like a project to perfect, with the focused intensity of someone who'd spent decades learning exactly how to give a woman what she needed. She felt transformed. Not just satisfied, that was too small a word. She felt claimed, worshipped, utterly known. Her body still hummed with aftershocks, sensitive everywhere he'd touched. And emotionally, she was wrecked. This wasn't just sex. This was connection. intimacy, proof that everything between them was real and possible and terrifying in its intensity. "You're quiet," Cadogan murmured against her hair. "I was wrong," Thessaly admitted, her voice still shaky. "About you. About this. You thought my age meant I'd disappoint you." His chest rumbled with quiet amusement under her cheek. "I know. I could see it in your eyes. I'm sorry. Don't be." He tilted her face up to meet his eyes. "I'd rather prove myself with actions than words." "Did I?" The question held vulnerability, despite his obvious skill. Like her opinion mattered more than any objective measure of performance. "You are so good," she said honestly. "I don't think anyone else will ever—" She stopped, heat flooding her face. His smile was dark and satisfied. "Nice." That was the intention. She traced idle patterns on his chest, marveling at the defined muscle, the warmth of his skin. Then her fingers found the surgical scar directly over his heart, raised tissue, recent enough to still be slightly red. "What's this from?" she asked, tracing the edges. His body tensed almost imperceptibly. "Minor procedure. Nothing to worry about. Cadogan. Not tonight." He caught her hand, pressing a kiss to her palm. "Tonight is ours. The rest of the world can wait until morning." He pulled her closer, and she let it go, too sated and emotionally overwhelmed to push. But the scar bothered her. It was too precise, too deliberate. That wasn't cosmetic or minor. That was cardiac surgery. "You terrify me," Cadogan whispered into her hair, his voice raw. "Because losing you would destroy me. Not the way I was destroyed before. This would be complete, total. There would be nothing left." Thessaly tilted her head to look up at him, seeing that devastating vulnerability again. She understood it now, felt it herself, the terrifying knowledge that she was falling in love with someone who could devastate her. "Then, don't lose me," she said simply. His arms tightened around her. "I'm going to fail you. I'm going to be too controlling or too obsessive or too— Then I'll tell you, and you'll listen, and we'll figure it out together." She pressed a kiss to his jaw. "That's what people do, Cadogan. They don't have to be perfect. They just have to try." He looked at her like she'd offered him salvation he didn't deserve. Then he kissed her again, slow and deep, and she felt heat beginning to build between them once more. This time, when they came together, it was slower, softer, but no less intense. And Thessaly learned that stamina really did come with experience. Cadogan seemed perfectly capable of going all night if she could handle it. She fell asleep hours later, completely spent, wrapped in his arms while moonlight painted them silver. Her body ached in the best way, her heart felt dangerously full, and somewhere in the space between consciousness and sleep, she admitted the truth to herself. She was in love with him, completely, terrifyingly in love. Thessaly woke to cold sheets and empty space where Cadogan should have been. Pale morning light filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows, turning Puget Sound silver-grey. Her body ached in unfamiliar places, reminders of the night before, of being thoroughly and repeatedly proven wrong about every assumption she'd made. The sheets still smelled like him, like them together, and heat flooded through her at the memory. Then she heard the buzzing. Cadogan's phone vibrated insistently on his nightstand, the screen lighting up with notification after notification. She reached for it instinctively, meaning to silence it, when she saw the contact name, Dr. Hollis. A dozen messages, all marked urgent. Thessaly sat up, unease prickling down her spine. She shouldn't look. This was private, his business, a violation of trust. But her fingers were already swiping, already opening the message thread, and what she saw made the air leave her lungs in a rush. Medical reports, lab results, imaging scans she didn't fully understand, but recognized as cardiac-related. And there, in clinical language that somehow made it worse, the diagnosis. Stage 3 cardiac sarcoma. Rare, aggressive, already metastasizing. Treatment options listed with their corresponding success rates, all devastatingly low. Prognosis without intervention, 12 to 18 months. With aggressive treatment, possibly 24 months, but quality of life significantly impacted. The most recent message, sent just an hour ago: Cadigan, you missed your consultation again. We need to discuss next steps immediately. The window for surgical intervention is closing. The scar, that surgical scar over his heart that he'd deflected questions about, not a minor procedure, not old business. He was dying. Thessaly's hands shook so badly the phone slipped from her fingers onto the bed. Her mind raced backward through every interaction, recontextualizing everything. He'd bought her knowing he had maybe 2 years left, married her while dying, made love to her last night while carrying this devastating secret, and he hadn't told her, hadn't given her the choice to decide if she wanted to sign up for inevitable heartbreak. She was out of bed before conscious thought caught up, pulling on his discarded shirt from the night before, her legs unsteady as she left his bedroom. She found him in his study, exactly where she'd known he'd be, sitting at his desk with his head in his hands. He looked up when she entered, and something in her expression made him go very still. "Thessaly, you're dying." Her voice came out flat, shock insulating her from the full emotional impact. "Cardiac sarcoma. Stage 3. 18 to 24 months, maybe less." The color drained from his face. His eyes went to his phone in her hand, then back to her face. "You read my messages. Your phone wouldn't stop buzzing. I thought it might be important." A hysterical laugh escaped her. "Turns out I was right. Your doctor is very concerned that you're missing consultations for your terminal cancer." Cadigan stood slowly, like a man preparing for execution. "I was going to tell you." "When?" The word cracked like a whip. "After you were dead? After I woke up one morning and you just didn't anymore?" Tears were streaming down her face now, hot and angry. "You married me knowing you might leave me a widow before I turned 25. You made me fall in love with you while you were dying, and you didn't think I deserved to know. I didn't know if the treatment would work." His voice was raw, stripped of all control. "The surgery I had 2 months ago was exploratory. They found it worse than expected, more aggressive. The oncologist gave me options, but none of them guaranteed anything except suffering and maybe a few more months. And I thought," he stopped, his hands clenching into fists, "I thought about Ilara, about how she stayed at first out of obligation when I suffocated her, about Valeth, who claimed to love me but really loved what I could give her. And I realized I would die, never knowing if someone could actually love me. Not my money or my power, or out of pity for my condition, just me. So you bought yourself a wife." Thessaly's voice broke. "Trapped someone who couldn't leave so you could pretend it was real?" "Yes." The admission seemed to cost him something vital. "At first, yes. I saw your file and thought, here's someone who needs saving. And maybe in saving you, I could feel like I mattered before I died. But then I met you, and you were angry and fierce and refused to be broken by any of this, and Sylvain loved you, and every day you chose to stay even though you hated me. I fell more in love with you." He moved toward her, stopping just out of reach. "I didn't want you to stay out of pity. I didn't want you to waste your youth, nursing a dying man. I needed, to know that someone could love me for me, even if it was built on a foundation of lies. I'm sorry. Thessaly, I'm so sorry. Beloved listener, if your partner hid a terminal illness, could you forgive them if you eventually find out? What would forgiveness require?" She stared at him through tears, seeing him clearly for the first time. Not the controlled billionaire or the obsessive stalker or the skilled lover from last night. Just a terrified, dying man who'd made catastrophically bad choices, trying to feel human before the end. "You idiot," she said, her voice shaking. "You absolute idiot. I know. I don't love you because you're perfect or immortal or because I'm trapped here." She crossed the distance between them, grabbing his face in both hands. "I love you because you're you, flawed, controlling, desperate, and trying so damn hard to be better than your worst instincts. I love you because you see your daughter in doorways and look at her like she's magic. I love you because you brought me to save me from something worse, even if your methods were insane. I love you because when you touch me, I feel like I matter." Cadogan's breath hitched, his hands coming up to cover hers. "Thessaly, we're going to fight this together," she said fiercely. "You're going to call Dr. Hollis back and schedule whatever consultation you've been avoiding. You're going to explore every treatment option, and I'm going to be there for every appointment, every procedure, every moment, not out of pity or obligation, but because I choose to be. Do you understand me?" He pulled her against him, burying his face in her hair, and she felt his shoulders shake with silent sobs. "I don't deserve you. Probably not. But you have me anyway." She held him tighter. "We're going to fight like hell, and maybe we'll get more than 18 months. Maybe we'll get years. Maybe they're wrong entirely. But whatever time we have, we're facing it together. With honesty, no more secrets." "No more secrets," he whispered against her hair. They stood like that, wrapped around each other in his study, while morning light painted the sound outside his windows. For the first time since discovering the diagnosis, Cadogan felt something other than despair. Hope, maybe, or at least the possibility of it. Then the door burst open. Marcus Trenton, Cadogan's head of security, stood in the doorway, his face grim and his hand on his sidearm. "Sir, we have a situation. Someone's breached the estate perimeter. Multiple contacts, heavily armed, moving toward the main house." The alarm started blaring before he finished speaking, a piercing wail that shattered the morning quiet. Through the windows, Thessaly saw movement in the gardens, dark figures, tactical gear, advancing with military precision. Cadogan's entire demeanor shifted in an instant, the vulnerable man disappearing behind the controlled strategist. "Get Sylvain to the safe room. Now. Full lockdown protocol. Already in motion, sir. But you need to see this." Marcus held up a tablet showing security footage. "They're not trying to be subtle. This is a message." On the screen, one of the figures held up a sign to the camera. Block letters, clear even from a distance. "We want Thessaly Renvale. You have 10 minutes. The alarms were deafening. Thessaly's training from the security team, protocols she'd barely paid attention to during orientation, flooded back in fragmented pieces. "Safe room, east wing. Get to Sylvain." "Stay behind me," Cadogan ordered, already moving toward the door. Marcus was speaking rapidly into his radio, coordinating security response, his weapon drawn. Through the study windows, Thessaly could see at least 6 figures advancing across the grounds with tactical precision. They made it halfway down the corridor before the explosion hit. The east wing entrance blew inward with a concussive force that threw Thessaly into the wall. Her ears rang, vision swimming. Through the smoke and debris, she saw Cadogan on the ground, blood streaming from a gash on his temple. Marcus was firing at figures moving through the destruction, his voice hoarse as he shouted orders into his radio. Then she heard Sylvain screaming. Instinct overrode everything else. Thessaly scrambled to her feet and ran toward the sound, toward the east wing, where smoke billowed from the destroyed entrance. She found Sylvain in her bedroom, frozen with terror, Mrs. Kelch unconscious on the floor beside her. "Thess!" The girl ran to her, and Thessaly caught her, lifting her easily despite her small hands shaking. "I've got you, sweetheart. I've got you." She turned to run back toward Cadogan and found 3 men in tactical gear blocking the hallway. They wore masks, carried military-grade weapons, and moved with the efficiency of professionals. The one in front raised his gun, not at her, but past her, and she heard Marcus grunt in pain somewhere behind them. "Mrs. Renvale, the girl. Come with us now. And no one else gets hurt." "Like hell," Thessaly started, but one of them fired. Not at her, at the wall beside her head. The message was clear. Sylvain screamed against her shoulder. Cadogan's voice roared from somewhere in the chaos. "Don't you fucking touch them. Then rough hands grabbed Thessaly's arms, prying Sylvain from her grip. The girl's screams intensified as she was passed to another operative. Thessaly fought, landing a solid kick that made one man grunt, but there were too many of them. Someone zip-tied her wrists. Someone else jabbed a needle into her arm. The last thing she saw before the drugs pulled her under was Cadogan fighting his way through smoke and debris, blood covering half his face, Marcus struggling to stand behind him. He looked like a man possessed, terrifying and desperate, and entirely focused on reaching her. Then darkness swallowed everything. She woke in motion, a vehicle, industrial, no windows. Her head pounded, and her mouth tasted like chemicals. Beside her, Sylvain was curled into a ball, awake but silent with shock. Thessaly's wrists were still bound, but they'd left her legs free. Across from them sat a woman in expensive tactical wear, blonde hair pulled back, ice-chip eyes familiar. Valeth Crane smiled. "Welcome back, Thessaly. Sorry about the dramatics, but Cadogan wouldn't have let you go voluntarily. Where are you taking us?" Thessaly's voice came out hoarse. She shifted to put herself between Valeth and Sylvain. "Somewhere your husband will find you, eventually, after I get what I want." The drive took 40 minutes. When they finally stopped and hauled Thessaly and Sylvain out, she saw they were at some kind of industrial facility, abandoned warehouses outside what looked like Olympia based on the landscape. The building they entered was cavernous and empty, except for some chairs and equipment that had been set up recently, definitely staged for this specific purpose. They put Thessaly and Sylvain in the center of the space, cutting the zip ties only to secure Thessaly to a chair with proper restraints. Sylvain they left free, probably calculating correctly that Thessaly wouldn't run while the girl was still captive. The child immediately pressed against Thessaly's side, trembling. "It's okay, sweetheart," Thessaly whispered. "Your daddy's going to find us. I promise." How touching! The voice came from the shadows, and Thessaly's blood turned to ice. Daxon stepped into the light, looking exactly as he had the last time she'd seen him, expensive suit, practiced charm, the smile that had convinced her mother to marry him, the smile that had hidden a monster willing to sell his stepdaughter to human traffickers. "Hello, Thessaly. You're looking well. Marriage to a billionaire sure do look good on you." "You bastard." The words came out venomous. "You sold me. You sold me to exactly who I intended to," Daxon finished smoothly. "Did you really think that auction was random? That Cadogan Renvale just happened to find your file and develop his White Knight complex?" Valeth moved to stand beside him, and the pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. "We've been working together for almost a year," she said. "Ever since Cadogan destroyed what we had, and then destroyed my reputation in the industry when I fought back. I wanted revenge. Daxon wanted money. And Cadogan, well, Cadogan had predictable weaknesses we could exploit." "I don't understand," Thessaly said, though she was starting to. Daxon pulled up a chair, sitting casually like they were having coffee instead of participating in a kidnapping. Valeth knew Cadogan's type, broken things he could fix, damsels he could save. She knew about his diagnosis. Did he tell you about that, by the way? The ticking clock that made him desperate for connection before he died. Thessaly said nothing, just pulled Sylvain closer. "So we engineered the perfect trap," Valeth continued. "Daxon creates the debt, structures it, so the only solution is selling you into that auction, the one I made sure Cadogan would hear about. His hero complex does the rest. He swoops in, pays 50 million to save you, marries you to keep you safe, gets emotionally attached, despite himself. And then," Thessaly asked, though Dread was already providing the answer. "Then we leverage that attachment." Valeth's smile was all edges. "Cadogan received documents this morning. Either he signs over controlling interest in his company to a shell corporation I control, or you and his daughter disappear permanently. He has until market close," she checked her watch, "which gives him about 3 hours to decide what's more important, his empire or his family." Thessaly's mind raced. He'll never do it. He'll find another way. There is no other way. Daxon leaned forward. We've been planning this for months. Every contingency covered. Every escape route blocked. The security team has already been paid off, most of them anyway. The ones who weren't are currently dealing with fires we've lit all over his business holdings. He's alone, injured, and running out of time. And when you get the company... Thessaly kept her voice steady despite her racing heart. She needed them talking, needed time for whatever Cadogan was planning. I dismantle it, Valeth said simply. Sell it off in pieces. Destroy everything he built, the same way he destroyed me. Daxon gets his 20 million finder's fee. And you too, she looked at Thessaly and Sylvain with cold calculation. Well, that depends on how cooperative Cadogan is. Sylvain whimpered against Thessaly's side. The girl was 7 years old, watching adults casually discuss her murder. Something fierce and protective ignited in Thessaly's chest, something that burned away the fear and left only determination. You think this will break him? She said quietly. You're wrong. You knew him for 5 years, Valeth, but you never understood him. You think he's weak because he loves people. You think emotional attachment is vulnerability. Isn't it? Valeth's eyebrow arched. It's what makes him dangerous. Thessaly met her ice-chip eyes directly. You've given a dying man with nothing left to lose a reason to burn the world down. You've threatened the two people he loves most. And you think he's going to play by your rules? Follow your timeline? She smiled, sharp and certain. He's going to come for us. And when he does, he won't be the controlled businessman you remember. He'll be something much worse. Valeth's expression flickered, just for a moment, with something that might have been doubt. Daxon laughed nervously. She's bluffing, trying to buy time. Maybe. Valeth checked her watch again. He'll be here in 20 minutes if he's following the tracker I left him, long enough for my offshore accounts to clear the first transfer. Then I'll decide if you two survive or not. She moved closer to Thessaly, studying her face. You really love him, don't you? It wasn't just Stockholm Syndrome or survival instinct. You actually fell for the obsessive bastard. Yes, Thessaly said simply, and that's why you've already lost. Because he knows I love him. And there's nothing more dangerous than a man fighting for someone who chose him freely. In the distance, barely audible, came the sound of helicopter rotors. Valeth's smile sharpened. Right on time. Let's see if your faith in him is justified, shall we? The helicopter rotors grew louder, closer, until the entire warehouse shook with the sound. Valeth moved to the industrial windows, her expression shifting from confident to calculating as she watched whatever was happening outside. Daxon stood, his easy charm fracturing into something nervous. How many men did he bring? Daxon asked. Enough. Valeth pulled a weapon from her tactical vest, sleek, professional, held with the ease of someone trained. She crossed to Thessaly and pressed the barrel against her temple. Sylvain screamed. Everyone stay calm. This doesn't have to get messy. But it was already messy. The warehouse doors exploded inward with controlled charges that sent metal shrieking across concrete. Smoke grenades followed, filling the cavernous space with thick white clouds. Thessaly heard shouting, tactical commands, the precise movements of professional security forces engaging Valeth's hired guards. Through the chaos, one figure moved with singular focus. Cadogan emerged from the smoke like something conjured from nightmare, blood still matting his hair from the earlier head wound, his expensive suit torn and filthy, moving with the relentless determination of a man who'd already decided nothing would stop him. He had a gun in one hand, and rage carved into every line of his face. 4 of Valeth's guards tried to intercept him. Thessaly watched in shock as Cadogan dropped 2 with precise shots, then physically fought through the others with a brutality she'd never seen from him. This wasn't the controlled billionaire or the careful lover. This was something primal and terrifying, a dying man with nothing left to lose, fighting for the only things that mattered. Cadogan, stop! Valeth's voice cut through the chaos. The gun pressed harder against Thessaly's temple, and Sylvain's screaming intensified. "One more step and I paint the walls with her brain." He stopped. 15 feet away, close enough that Thessaly could see his chest heaving with exertion, could see the wild desperation in his eyes as they tracked over her and Sylvain, cataloguing injuries, confirming they were alive. "Let them go," he said, his voice rough and raw. "This is between us, Velith. It's always been between us." "Oh, now you want to acknowledge what we had?" Velith's laugh was bitter. "After you discarded me like broken equipment? After you replaced me with fresh-faced innocence and called it love? I never loved you." The words were brutal in their honesty. "I wanted to. I tried to. But what we had was two damaged people consuming each other. That's not love, it's mutual destruction." The gun trembled slightly against Thessaly's head. "And her? Your purchased bride? That's real love?" "Yes." Cadogan's eyes found Thessaly's, and despite everything, the guns, the chaos, the blood and smoke, his expression softened. "She chose me, not my money, not out of fear or obligation. She chose me knowing I'm dying, knowing I'm damaged, knowing I'll probably hurt her with my inability to love like a normal person. She chose me anyway." How touching. Velith's voice dripped venom. "Let's see how that love holds up when I... Take me instead." Cadogan lowered his gun, setting it on the concrete floor. His hands rose, empty, surrendering. "You want to hurt me? I'm right here. Let them go, and I'll give you anything you want. The company, my assets, my life, whatever you need to feel like you've won." "No!" Thessaly's protest came out fierce despite the gun at her head. "Don't you dare sacrifice yourself. We don't make deals with—" "Thessaly." His voice cut through her rising panic, calm and certain in a way that terrified her. "I'd face anything for you. Walk into fire. Surrender everything I've built. Give up my last breath. I'd do it all without hesitation. This is my choice." Tears streamed down her face. "You don't get to die for me. I get to die protecting what I love." His eyes never left hers, and she saw the truth there. He'd already made peace with this. Already decided that her life and Sylvain's were worth more than his own. "And I love you more than I've ever loved anything or anyone in my entire life." Velith made a sound of disgust. "God, you're pathetic." The great Cadogan Renvale, brought to his knees by Thessaly, saw her moment. Velith's attention had shifted fractionally toward Cadogan, her focus split between gloating and maintaining control. The gun barrel wasn't pressed quite as firmly against her temple, and Sylvain, terrified, traumatized Sylvain, was standing just to the side, small and forgotten. "Sylvain," Thessaly said quietly, calmly, "remember the game we played, where you pretend to faint?" The girl's tear-filled eyes met hers. Understanding flickered. "Now, sweetheart." Sylvain collapsed with a dramatic cry, her small body hitting the concrete. Velith's instinct was immediate and human. She looked down at the child, her gun tracking away from Thessaly's head for just a second. Thessaly threw herself backward, chair and all, using her weight to knock into Velith's legs. The gun discharged, deafening in the enclosed space, but the shot went wild, hitting concrete somewhere to the left. Then everything happened at once. Cadogan was moving before Thessaly hit the ground, covering the 15 feet in seconds. His security team materialized from the smoke, weapons trained. Velith tried to aim again, but Cadogan slammed into her with the full force of his body, and they went down in a tangle of limbs. The fight was brief and vicious. Velith was trained, skilled, dangerous, but Cadogan fought like a man possessed, like someone who'd already accepted death, and therefore had nothing to fear from it. He pinned her, wrenched the gun away, and held her down while his security team moved in with restraints. Daxon tried to run, and made it maybe 10 feet before 2 operatives tackled him. Then Cadogan was at Thessaly's side, his hands shaking as he worked the restraints free. "Are you hurt? Did she God? Thessaly, are you?" "I'm fine." She was free and immediately reached for Sylvain, pulling the trembling girl into her arms. "We're both fine. Cadogan, we're okay." He pulled them both against his chest, his arms wrapping around them with desperate strength. Thessaly felt him trembling, felt the rapid hammer of his heart against her cheek. "I thought I lost you. When they took you, when I saw them hurt you, I thought, we're here. We're safe." She pulled back to look at his face, at the blood and exhaustion and overwhelming relief etched into his features. "You came for us." His hand came up to cup her face, his thumb gentle despite the violence he'd just committed. "I'll always come for you. Both of you." Sirens wailed in the distance, real authorities, not just private security. Cadogan's team was already processing the scene, securing Valeth and Daxon, collecting evidence. Someone was speaking urgently into a radio about medical personnel. Cadogan tried to stand and staggered. Thessaly caught him, alarmed. "Cadogan, I'm fine." But his voice was strained, and when she looked down, she saw fresh blood spreading across his shirt. Not from the head wound, but from somewhere else. He'd been shot or stabbed during the fight, and the adrenaline that had carried him through was failing. "You're not fine." She supported his weight as he swayed. "We need paramedics, now." His legs gave out, and she went down with him, cradling his head as he collapsed onto the concrete. His face had gone grey, his breathing shallow and laboured. The blood was spreading too fast. Arterial, critical. "Stay with me," Thessaly commanded, her voice breaking. "You don't get to save us and then die. You hear me, Cadogan? You promised we'd fight this together." His hand found hers, gripping weakly. "I love you," he whispered. "Whatever happens, you need to know. Don't you dare say goodbye." She was sobbing now, her free hand pressing against the wound, trying to slow the bleeding. "Sylvain needs you. I need you. You promised me more time." Paramedics burst through the warehouse doors, called in by his security team. They surrounded him with efficient urgency, assessing vitals, applying pressure, calling for immediate transport. Someone tried to pull Thessaly away, and she fought them. "I'm his wife. I'm not leaving him." Cadogan's eyes found hers one more time before they loaded him onto the stretcher. "I love you," he mouthed. Then his eyes fluttered closed. "Cadogan!" Thessaly's scream echoed through the warehouse. "No! Stay with me! Please!" They were already moving, running him toward the helicopter that had landed outside. Someone, Marcus, she realized distantly, was holding Sylvain, keeping the girl from seeing her father's blood-soaked body. Someone else was trying to explain that Thessaly could ride with him, that they needed to move now, if there was any chance. She ran after the stretcher, climbed into the helicopter beside him, and watched paramedics work with desperate efficiency while the rotors lifted them toward a Tacoma hospital. His heart monitor beeped irregularly, and all Thessaly could do was hold his hand and pray that choosing each other had been enough. Consciousness returned slowly, pulling Cadogan from darkness through layers of pain and medication. The first thing he registered was the rhythmic beeping of monitors, then the antiseptic smell of hospital, then the warmth of fingers interlaced with his own. He turned his head, carefully, because everything hurt, and found Thessaly. She was asleep in a chair pulled close to his bed, her head resting on the mattress near their joined hands. Dark circles shadowed her eyes. Her hair was tangled, still carrying traces of smoke and dust from the warehouse. She wore clothes that weren't hers, borrowed scrubs probably, and looked utterly exhausted. She'd never been more beautiful. Cadogan tried to speak and managed only a rough sound that hurt his throat. But it was enough. Thessaly's eyes flew open, and the relief that flooded her face made something crack open in his chest. "You're awake." Her voice broke on the words. "Oh God, you're awake. Don't move. I'll get the doctor." Wait, he tightened his grip on her hand before she could leave. How long? 3 days. You've been unconscious for 3 days. Tears streamed down her face freely now. You coded twice during surgery. They said they weren't sure if... Sylvain? Safe. Your sister Alexandra came from Portland. She's staying with her, taking care of her. Sylvain knows you're going to be okay. She made you drawings. Thessaly gestured to the wall where childish artwork had been taped, flowers and rainbows and stick figures labelled Daddy and Thess, holding hands. The simple evidence of his daughter's love undid him. And Vailith, Daxon, federal custody. Both of them. Thessaly's expression hardened. Your security team had been investigating Vailith for months. Fraud, conspiracy. They had evidence of everything. When she took us, she handed them the kidnapping charges on top of it all. She's not getting out. Neither is Daxon. Cadogan processed this. Relief mixing with exhaustion. My company. Intact. Your CFO has been handling things. The hostile takeover attempt failed spectacularly when Vailith's shell corporations turned out to be under federal investigation. Thessaly managed a watery smile. Apparently trying to extort a dying billionaire while committing multiple felonies wasn't her best strategic move. He would have laughed if it wouldn't hurt. Instead, he just absorbed the information. Sylvain safe. The threats neutralized, his empire secure, everything handled while he'd been unconscious. There's something else. Thessaly's voice changed, became cautious. Dr. Hollis has been here every day. During the emergency surgery, when they were trying to stop the bleeding from where you got stabbed, they did more comprehensive scans. Cadogan, your tumor. She stopped, fresh tears falling. It wasn't what they thought it was. His heart monitor spiked. What? It's called cardiac fibroma, extremely rare, which is why it was misdiagnosed initially as sarcoma, but it's benign. Not cancer. The words tumbled out, rushed and disbelieving, like she still couldn't quite accept them. They removed it during the surgery. All of it. Dr. Hollis said with immunotherapy and monitoring. Your prognosis is excellent. Not 18 months, Cadogan. Decades. You're going to live. The room spun. He'd spent months preparing to die, making peace with a short timeline, trying to pack a lifetime of meaning into whatever time he had left. And now... I'm not dying? His voice cracked. You're not dying. Thessaly climbed onto the hospital bed beside him, careful of his IV lines and monitors, and pressed her face against his shoulder. We have time. All the time in the world. He wrapped his arm around her and let himself feel it, relief, joy, overwhelming gratitude. Then, because he was still Cadogan Renvale and couldn't help but try to do the right thing, even when it destroyed him, he said, You don't have to stay. Thessaly went very still against him. The contract is void, he continued, forcing the words out. Vailith and Daxon's manipulation nullifies the original terms. My lawyers confirmed it. You're free, Thessaly. Free to leave, to go back to your life, to make choices that aren't coerced by debt or obligation. Or... She sat up so fast it made his monitors beep in alarm. Are you serious right now? I want you to have a choice. You really are an idiot. She stared at him like he'd suggested the earth was flat. After everything we've been through, you think I'm here because of a contract? I forced you into this. I stalked you, bought you, trapped you in a marriage you never wanted. And then I fell in love with you. The words came out fierce, almost angry. I didn't stay because of a contract, Cadogan. I stayed because I'm in love with you. Because we're a family, you, me and Sylvain. Because when you were bleeding out on that warehouse floor, all I could think was that I'd finally found someone worth fighting for, and I couldn't lose you. Because I choose you. Every single day. For the rest of our lives. Thessaly. I choose the man who spent $50 million to save me from something worse, even though his methods were insane. I choose the man who fights like a demon when someone threatens his family. I choose the man who's trying so hard to be better than his worst instincts. She cupped his face in both hands. I choose you. You magnificent, damaged, impossible man. Not because I have to, because I want to. Cadogan felt something break inside him, something he'd held rigid and controlled for his entire life. Tears spilled down his face, and he didn't try to stop them. "I love you," he said, his voice wrecked. "God, Thessaly, I love you so much it scares me." "Good." She kissed him, gentle because he was injured, but deep and certain. "Be scared. I'm scared too. We can be scared together." He kissed her back, tasting salt from both their tears, and for the first time in his life felt like maybe he deserved this. Deserved her. Deserved the family they were building from broken pieces. A nurse knocked and entered, apologizing for the interruption. She carried a folder of documents, setting them on the bedside table with practiced efficiency. "Your attorney wanted me to bring these up. Annulment papers, if you want them. Given the circumstances of the original marriage, it would be straightforward." Cadogan looked at the folder, then at Thessaly. "Or, do." He reached carefully toward his jacket, draped over a nearby chair. Marcus had apparently brought his personal effects from the estate. From the inside pocket, he pulled out a small velvet box he'd been carrying for 2 weeks, waiting for the right moment. "Or," he continued, opening the box to reveal a ring, nothing like the platinum band he'd placed on her finger during their forced ceremony. This was rose gold and diamonds, delicate and warm, chosen specifically for her. "We could do this right." Thessaly's breath caught. "Thessaly Moorgrave," Cadogan said, his voice steady, despite the tears still on his face. Despite the hospital gown and the monitors and the absolute vulnerability of this moment. "Will you marry me? For real this time? Not because of a contract or debts or coercion. Because you want to. Because we choose each other freely, with full knowledge of exactly how damaged and difficult and complicated this is going to be." She was already nodding before he finished, already reaching for the ring with shaking hands. "Yes, yes, you dollop head, I will marry you." He laughed as he slid the ring onto her finger, the same finger that still wore the platinum band from their forced wedding. She looked at both rings, then at him with a question in her eyes. "Keep it," he said quietly. "Keep them both. The old one as a reminder of where we started, and the new one as a promise of what we're choosing to become." Thessaly launched herself at him, carefully, but with enough force that his monitors alarmed again. She kissed him through tears and laughter and overwhelming joy, while the nurse diplomatically retreated, leaving the annulment papers forgotten on the table. They'd started with coercion and control, with stalking and forced vows. But this was real, freely chosen, authentic. This was their true beginning. The San Juan Islands in late summer were exactly as beautiful as the photographs had promised. Thessaly stood in a cottage overlooking the beach, watching through the window as guests gathered on the sand below. White chairs arranged in rows, an arch wound with local wildflowers, the sound beyond, stretching infinite and silver blue under cloudless sky. 6 months had passed since the hospital, since the annulment papers left unsigned, since Cadogan had offered her a choice and she'd chosen him. 6 months of healing, his body from surgery and trauma, their relationship from the scars of how it began. 6 months of therapy, honest conversations, learning to be a family instead of a collection of damaged people orbiting each other. 6 months of falling more in love every single day. "You look beautiful, sweetheart." Her mother's voice was soft with emotion. Patricia Moorgrave stood in the doorway, healthy in a way she hadn't been in years, free from Daxon's debts and control, receiving proper medical treatment. She'd regained color and strength. Today she wore lavender and tears of joy. "Are you ready?" Thessaly turned from the window, smoothing the simple silk dress she'd chosen. Ivory, elegant, nothing like the midnight blue she'd worn to their forced wedding. This dress was her choice. Everything today was her choice. "I'm ready." Sylvain burst into the room, her flower girl dress a cloud of white tulle, a crown of daisies in her dark hair. "Thess!" Daddy says it's almost time and he's crying already and Uncle Marcus is making fun of him. Thessaly laughed, kneeling to adjust Sylvain's crown. The girl had blossomed over the past 6 months, therapy helping her process her mother's abandonment, Thessaly's constant presence proving that not all adults disappeared. She smiled more now, laughed freely, called Thessaly Mom, sometimes when she forgot to be careful with the word. Well, we can't keep Daddy waiting, can we? They walked down to the beach together, Patricia on one side, Sylvain on the other. Thessaly had asked both of them to walk her down the aisle, symbolizing the family she was choosing and the family she was gaining. The small gathering of guests stood as they approached. Cadogan's sister Alexandra and her family, a handful of trusted friends, some of Cadogan's executives who'd become genuine allies. And at the altar, waiting with the officiant and Marcus as his best man, stood Cadogan. He wore a simple grey suit, no tie, his shirt open at the collar, in concession to the beach setting. The past 6 months had been kind to him. The shadow of death lifted, healthy colour returned to his face, the lines of stress eased. He'd cut back his hours, spent more time with Sylvain, learned to delegate and trust, learned to live instead of just survive. When he saw Thessaly, his composure shattered immediately. Tears streamed down his face, and he didn't bother hiding them. Just stood there crying openly while she walked toward him, his expression holding such pure joy it made her own eyes sting. Marcus leaned over and whispered something that made Cadogan laugh through his tears. When Thessaly reached the altar, Cadogan took both her hands like she was something precious. "Hi," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Hi, yourself." She squeezed his fingers. "You're crying." "I'm happy." He smiled through the tears. "I'm so goddamn happy I don't know what to do with it." The ceremony was simple, intimate. No corporate attorneys or forced signatures, just an officiant who spoke about love as choice, about building families from intention rather than obligation. And then it was time for vows. Thessaly went first, pulling out the paper she'd written and rewritten a dozen times. Cadogan, 6 months ago. Well, a year ago, really, I thought my life was ending. I thought I was being sold into a nightmare I'd never escape. And in some ways, I was right. But you, her voice caught, you saved me from a nightmare and gave me a dream. You showed me that broken people can heal together, that control can transform into trust, that love doesn't have to be perfect to be real. She looked up from the paper to meet his eyes. You gave me Sylvain, you gave me family, you gave me a future I didn't think I deserved, and I promise to choose you every single day for the rest of our lives. Not because I have to, but because I want to. Because you're mine, and I'm yours, and that's the only contract I'll ever need. Cadogan was openly sobbing now, not even trying to maintain composure. He wiped his eyes, took a shaking breath, and pulled out his own vows. Thessaly, I spent most of my life thinking love was about possession, about control, about building walls high enough that nothing could hurt me or the people I claimed to protect. I suffocated everyone I touched because I didn't know the difference between protection and prison. He stopped, composing himself. You taught me that love isn't about control, it's about trust, freedom, and choosing each other every single day. You taught me that I could be a better man, that being vulnerable wasn't weakness, it was strength. You gave me back my daughter's laughter. You gave me a reason to fight for my life. When I'd accepted death, you gave me. His voice broke completely. You gave me everything, and I promise to spend the rest of my life, however long that is, being worthy of the choice you made. I love you, Thessaly. I love you more than I knew it was possible to love anyone. There wasn't a dry eye on the beach. The officiant had to take a moment to compose herself before pronouncing them married, for real this time, with vows they'd written and witnesses who loved them and rings they'd chosen together. When Cadogan kissed her, the small gathering erupted in applause and cheers. Sylvain shrieked with joy, and Thessaly felt complete in a way she'd never imagined possible. The reception was simple. Dinner on the beach, string lights as the sun set, music playing softly. Thessaly and Cadogan's first dance was to something slow and sweet, and halfway through, Cadogan pulled Sylvain up to dance with them, the three of them swaying together while guests watched with knowing smiles. Later, after Sylvain had been passed to Alexandra for bedtime, Cadogan pulled Thessaly close during another dance. The sun was setting, painting the water in shades of gold and rose. "I have a confession," he whispered against her ear. Thessaly tensed slightly, old instincts firing. "What?" She felt him grin. "I'm thinking 3 more kids. Maybe 4. Or even 10. Relief and laughter bubbled up. She pulled back to look at his face, seeing the playful challenge there. 10? Have you lost your mind? Sylvain needs siblings. The house is too big. And I have very good genes to pass on. Your humility is astounding," she pretended to consider, drawing it out. "Negotiate down to 2, and you have a deal." 3, he counted, spinning her out and back. "And I'll build you a library bigger than the estate. Private reading room, first editions of everything you love, comfortable chairs, the works." Thessaly bit her lip, pretending to weigh the offer. "Deal. But I'm naming them. All 3. You don't get input." "Absolutely not. We're negotiating names together like civilized people." "Fine. 2 names each. And Sylvain gets to pick the third baby's middle name." He laughed, pulling her close again. "God, I love you, even when you're extorting library editions out of me in exchange for children." She pressed a kiss to his jaw. "That's when you know it's real." They danced as the sun dipped toward the horizon, painting everything gold. Around them, guests laughed and talked, celebrating not just a wedding but a triumph. 2 broken people who'd found each other in the worst circumstances and built something beautiful anyway. Marcus approached with Sylvain, who'd apparently refused to sleep and had been allowed back to the party. The girl was practically vibrating with excitement, her flower crown askew. "Can I dance too?" she asked hopefully. Cadogan scooped her up without hesitation, settling her between him and Thessaly. They danced together, all 3 of them, laughing as Sylvain tried to mirror their movements. The photographer captured the moment. A family not bound by blood or contracts, but by choice and love, and the conscious decision to build something new from broken pieces. As the sun set fully and stars began appearing over the sound, Thessaly rested her head against Cadogan's shoulder while Sylvain dozed against his chest. Everything was warm and safe and impossibly right. "Hey," Cadogan said softly, "thank you." "For what?" "For choosing me, for staying when you could have left, for teaching me what love actually means." He kissed the top of her head. "For giving me a future I thought I'd lost." Thessaly looked up at him, this man who'd stalked her, bought her, trapped her, and then somehow became the love of her life. "Thank you for being worth choosing, for doing the work, for becoming someone I could love freely instead of out of fear. We did good, didn't we?" His voice held wonder, like he still couldn't quite believe this was real. "We did great." They stood there on the beach as night fell completely, wrapped around each other and their daughter, surrounded by people who loved them. The water whispered against the shore. Music played softly. Stars multiplied overhead in the clear island sky. From a distance, if anyone had been watching, they would have seen a perfect family portrait, a man, a woman, a child, dancing slowly while the world turned dark around them. They would have seen love, peace, happiness. They wouldn't have known the truth, that this family had been forged in trauma and control and desperate choices, that it had nearly been destroyed a dozen times over, that it had required forgiveness, therapy, honest conversations, and the conscious decision to build something new instead of running from something broken. But maybe that was the point. Maybe the best families weren't the ones that came easy, but the ones you fought for. The ones you chose every single day, despite the scars and complications and imperfect beginnings. As they finally walked back toward the cottage, Sylvain asleep in Cadogan's arms and their fingers interlaced, Thessaly felt a deep sense of peace settle over her. They say you can't build a future on a broken foundation, she thought, the words forming like a prayer or a promise. But we didn't. We tore it down and built something new. Together, and that made all the difference. The cottage lights glowed warm ahead of them. Behind them, the sound whispered its eternal rhythm. And above them, stars blazed in the darkness, constant, eternal, bearing witness to two broken people who'd found wholeness in each other. Their story had started with control and coercion, but it ended with choice, trust, and a love that had conquered everything. The end. Here's my question for you before we wrap it up. At what point did you start rooting for them? Or did you never root for them at all? Comment below. I'm genuinely curious where you landed on this one. If you loved this story, subscribe, because I've got another one coming that's even more morally complicated. Hit that like button if you made it to the end, and I'll see you in my next story. Lots of love.